How's it going, everyone? My name is Kyle, and this is episode 3 of my series Video Bootcamp, from the beginning all the way up to professional video and filmmaking. We are in episode 3. The last 2 were on the camera and the production process. This one is on story. Story. I tell everybody one of the most fundamental things of making anything creative is story. You need to have something going on. If you watch something without story, it's very obvious. It's bland, you're not involved, you're not invested, you don't even know what's going on, you're confused, unengaged. Story changes everything. If you have a story, even in the most basic production, if you post on your Snapchat, talk about your day, you're gonna set it up by where it started and then some kind of conflict and end. Story, basics of story. I can't emphasize this enough. Having story in anything that you produce, video or especially film-wise, is vital, and it will differentiate and have you stick out against your competitors if you have compelling story. Yes, there are abstract productions and films, but we're gonna have to learn the rules of story in filmmaking before we can bend and even possibly break them. So in this video, I'm gonna go over a ton of stories, the basics, 3-act structure, everything from whatever. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna start off with the very basic building blocks, the foundation of any good, well-rounded story, which is the 3-act structure. We have the first act, which is introducing our characters, the setting, and then we have a inciting incident that takes us to act 2, the adventure, anything that goes on, solving the issue or going somewhere. That's act 2. And then act 3, which is the conclusion, the return to normalcy after the protagonist or characters have solved the problem. That's act 3. If you want to get more involved, there's some transitions like going from act 1 to act 2. There's the inciting incident, there's rising action. After the inciting incident, the stakes and the tension continue to rise towards the climax, which transitions us from act 2 to act 3 climax, the height of excitement, the most tension in the story, and then from there we go down the curve of energy, concluding the story and ending. The 3-act structure is the basic story. Whenever I create any video, even this one, I started off by introducing the video. I told you who I am, what I'm gonna be talking about, how this fits into the series, and right now we're in act 2, the meat of the video. There's not gonna be a climax, there's not gonna be any super rising tension throughout, but then eventually we'll get into act 3 when I conclude the video, talk about, maybe summarize what we talked about, and then say goodbye. So that's a basic 3-act structure. If you implement this in every single video that you make, you're going to have the basis for a compelling, engaging production. Now we're gonna talk about a story structure that's very old. We're talking Greek mythology old, which is the hero's journey. And I'm gonna give you a basic outline of what the hero's journey looks like. We have the known/ordinary world. This is where our character starts off. Everything's very familiar, comfy, cozy. There's not much unknown, there's not much uncertain about the world. This is where our hero's journey begins. And then there's the call to adventure. Someone or something is compelling our character to go on an adventure, go away from the known and ordinary world to something unfamiliar and exciting. Once the character answers the call to adventure, there is the crossing of the threshold. This can be very physical, like a border between your hometown and the open road, or it can be very mental, where something changes in the character from being comfortable to being tense and being in an environment that's different to them or a situation that's different to them. Then there are the tests and trials. In classic Greek mythology, this would be Hercules training and defeating all the different monsters leading up to what is the climax. So testing the character, giving them trials for what they have learned. And then there is approaching the innermost cave. If our story is about a hero going into the depths of the earth to defeat some demon, then the innermost cave is the farthest, the deepest, hardest, and most stressful, intense part of our hero's journey. This is the penultimate moment of the story, and our character has just entered it by going into the innermost cave. This is going to be the height of the adventure. Then, of course, there is triumph. Any good story, good feeling story is going to have triumph. The hero has trained and tested themselves, had trials, fallen, made mistakes maybe, and is in the innermost cave fighting the greatest threat of the entire story. And then there's triumph. Your character has overcome everything, all of the adventure, and then returns, which is the last part of the hero's journey, returning back to what is known and ordinary. Changed, however. It's not the same person that we met at the beginning of the story. They've learned, they've gotten stronger, and they take that back to the ordinary world. That is the basic elements of the hero's journey. And you can actually get a lot of parallels between popular media and the hero's journey. For instance, Star Wars: A New Hope has a ton of elements of the hero's journey. George Lucas took the basic building blocks that are ancient from Greek mythology and very old stories and applied it to a sci-fi adventure movie. There are more elements to the hero's journey. For instance, there's the advisor character, like in A New Hope, it's Ben Kenobi coming to Luke to teach him things. In Lord of the Rings, it's Gandalf coming to Frodo to teach him things. Turning points, so in A New Hope, it's when they go to Alderaan in the Millennium Falcon and it's gone, and they have to rescue the princess on the Death Star.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
And then there are also the reward at the end. So in A New Hope, it's very obvious. They get medals for destroying the Death Star. Spoilers. And in Lord of the Rings, Frodo is hailed as a hero. And when he returns to the Shire, everyone... Does he return to the Shire? I guess I don't know the Lord of the Rings as well as I do. But in A New Hope, they get the medals. Chewie doesn't. Justice for Chewie. Going past the 3-act structure and even the ancient hero's journey, there are modern storytellers that have their own take and their own story structure that works and is effective. If you know about Rick and Morty, writer and producer Dan Harmon has a monomyth that he likes to talk about that he has applied to a lot of his TV shows, Rick and Morty, Community. So the first stage in the monomyth is you. Establish the protagonist. So you have to know who the audience is going to follow in this story, who is the surrogate for the audience. Step 2 is that protagonist needs something. Something isn't right. They're uneasy. Something in their mind is not complete. They are uncomfortable in their situation. Step 3 of Dan Harmon's monomyth is go, crossing the threshold. Our character has identified that something is not right and they are taking their first steps into solving that problem. Step 4 of Dan Harmon's monomyth is search, the road of thrills. So the character is going out on their journey, their story, searching for a solution to their problem. Step 5 is find, meeting the goddess. The character has met a character that has the capacity to help them on their journey, someone much more powerful than them, something, or just someone that has more capabilities than our protagonist does. Step 6 is take, or paying the price. Solving their problems does not come cheap, and they have to sacrifice something in order to solve it. 7 is return, bringing what they have home. with them, whether it be a newfound confidence or a shiny gold sword. They're taking that prize back home with them. And then step 8 of the monomyth is change, master of both worlds. The character is different from when they started off in our story, and they are a master of both what is known and what was unknown to them at the beginning of the story. So that's Dan Harmon's Monomyth. Now, these are 3 different ideas of how to tell a compelling story, but you can tell that they are very related. The key is to know how stories have been told in the past, how effective they have been, and taking those elements and applying them to your own story to create a well-paced and satisfying story in your production. All right, now let's talk more specifics about story. When it comes to making videos in filmmaking, you need to make it as easy as possible for audiences to follow, unless you're doing that on purpose and you're trying to confuse them. But these are the rules. We can bend or break them later. Audiences need a surrogate, and a character and the protagonist in your story is the surrogate for the audience. The director will guide the viewer visually through the shots and transitioning and having them focus on what the director wants them to see. But a character or protagonist will guide the audience through the narrative, the story of your video. Without someone to guide the audience, films can easily become convoluted or confusing. I want you to take a second and think about a movie that was really hard to follow or confusing, and it just felt like a mess. You didn't know what to focus on. A lot of people complain about the latest Star Wars movie, Rise of Skywalker. The beginning of it, we were jumping from planet to planet to planet. It felt very rushed for a lot of people. Now imagine that same intro, but instead of following characters we know, like Kylo Ren, we were introduced to new protagonists and characters every scene. We wouldn't know what to focus on. There's no thread, there's nothing carrying the audience at that point between the scenes. That example emphasizes why characters are so important when it comes to guiding an audience through the narrative. We need someone to attach ourselves with. On the other side of that token, you can absolutely guide your audience through your video visually and narratively with a surrogate or a protagonist, but you do not want to coddle them. Please do not treat your audience like idiots, even if you're making something for a younger audience. Give your viewers space to figure things out for themselves. Show, don't tell. Don't tell your viewer what you want them to get from it. Show them and have them figure it out for themselves. There's a movie that was released a few years ago, Kubo and the Two Strings. The visuals were amazing. It was a stop motion animation and it just was fantastic. However, the way that the writers treated the viewer at the end was less than desired. So there is a big twist at the end of Kubo and the Two Strings. However, the writers did a good job throughout the movie of foreshadowing it, and a keen viewer that is paying attention to details could probably predict it way ahead of time. But when it was revealed to our main protagonist, Kubo, it was blatantly obvious, right? They basically spelled it out without saying it. But then, just a moment later, they literally spell it out to the audience saying, this is what happened. This is how it is. And I don't want to get into spoilers because it's a great movie. I don't want to spoil the twist at the end, but it definitely took away from the impact I got as a viewer. Once that they literally spelled it out for me, I was like, oh, well, that's no fun, right? Like, a kid probably could have figured that out. Just because it's a kid's movie does not mean you can treat your audience like morons. Give them space to figure things out for themselves. Have some courage to allow your audience to have a different experience from one another. One of the greatest things of filmmaking is that different people can get unique perspectives and viewing experiences from watching the same film. These two concepts essentially boil down to finding a good balance between guiding your audience and telling them what to think. And it all depends on the type of project and story you're telling. If you are producing a local car dealership commercial, then telling the audience the message outright is probably the right move.
If you find a better deal, shove it up your ugly ass. You heard us right. Shove it up your ugly ass. Big Bill Hell's Cars. Baltimore's filthiest and exclusive home of the meanest sons of bitches in the state of Maryland. Guaranteed.
But when it comes to creating a mystery or suspenseful film, then it's probably not the right approach to tell the audience what to focus on, and will ruin the suspense of the story.
And now, another quick mystery.
I just want to know who could have done something like this. It's a travesty.
I did. See this knife and all the blood on it? Here's my fingerprints.
Guilty. I sentence you to life in prison.
Now you have the basic building blocks of telling a compelling story, and I'm gonna give you some homework. I want you to go out and shoot a 15-second video that has a very basic story. We're talking set up and introduce the protagonist and setting, have an inciting incident, compel the protagonist into action, and conclude it. Resolve that issue nice and tight. Bam! You just created a basic, compelling story with those 3 little building blocks. And now you can share it with other people to enjoy. And that is the very next step. Once you have created your tiny little video, edit all those shots together and upload it to YouTube. I have a Google form in the description where you can post your link in there, and I will create a playlist with all of the class films for all of us to enjoy. And the cool thing is that this is at the very beginning of the process, and once we go down the line and we have more exercises and things for you to do, you're gonna see improvement and everyone's gonna get better, which is, of course, the goal of Video Bootcamp. Thanks again for tuning into Video Bootcamp. This is episode 3. The next episode will be on design. So video design, shot types, movements, all of that great stuff to make your films look really pretty, right? As usual, if you have something to add to this episode, leave it in the comments section down below. Some personal experiences, things you've learned about telling stories, all of that great stuff. Subscribe if you want to get more Video Bootcamp episodes, and that'll do it for today. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.